Hey, welcome back. Go on, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let the world go quiet for a while. I've got 3 stories for you tonight, drawn from the shadows of real history. The last one still gives me a chill, so stay with me all the way to the end. The lamp had been dark for 11 nights before anyone rowed out to find 3 grown men simply gone. This was the winter of 1900, on a rock in the Flannan Isles off the west coast of Scotland, and I was the relief keeper sent out on the tender to see why the great light had failed. Passing ships had reported it night after night, but the seas had been too high to reach the island until the day I finally climbed those slick stone steps. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No one answered our whistle. The landing crane was intact, ropes coiled neat, everything squared away as a good keeper leaves it. But the gate to the enclosure was shut, and inside the tower the door stood closed against the wind. I called their names up the spiral stair: James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, Donald MacArthur. Nothing came back but the echo of my own voice. In the kitchen the fire was long cold, but the clock on the shelf had stopped, and here is the thing I have never forgotten. The table was set for a meal that had never been eaten. A chair lay knocked over on its back, as though someone had risen in a great hurry and simply never returned to right it. I climbed to the light itself. The lamp was clean, the wick trimmed, the reservoir full of oil. Everything was ready to be lit. Whatever happened had not happened while they worked. It happened in a single moment that caught them between one ordinary task and the next. Up in the tower, we found the logbook, and the last entries were what troubled me most. Days before the disappearance, one of them had written of a storm of terrible fury, of winds screaming, of the men praying. Yet the shipping records showed the seas had been calm those very days. Calm. There had been no storm, and then a later line, in a different hand: God is over all, and nothing after. We searched the whole island, every gully and cliff and ledge. On the west landing we found the damage at last. The iron railings were bent and torn. A great box of ropes, kept in a crevice more than 100 feet above the water, had been ripped out and scattered. Whatever had struck the west side had struck with the force of the sea itself, and it had struck high, far higher than any wave should reach. The official verdict, when it came, was simple and comforting. A rogue wave, they said. 2 men went down to secure equipment before a swell. The third followed to help, and a single monstrous swell took all 3. It is neat. It is the sort of thing that lets a man sleep. But I stood in that kitchen, and I have turned it over in my mind for the rest of my life. If a wave took 2 men at the landing, why was the third man's oilskin still hanging on its hook inside the tower? Donald MacArthur had gone out into whatever it was without his coat. A keeper of 20 years does not step into a winter gale on that rock in his shirt sleeves. Something called him out so suddenly he did not stop to dress. And the meal. 3 men do not sit down to eat, then all rise at once, knocking over a chair, and go running to the far landing together on an ordinary evening. Something drew every one of them out of that tower at the same instant, and it drew them fast, and it drew them completely. I relit the lamp that night and every night after, and in the quiet hours, watching the beam sweep the black water, I sometimes thought of that log entry about a storm that no ship ever felt. 3 men frightened of a fury only they could see. I served 4 more years on that rock, and I never once ate a meal without first bolting the door, though I could never have told you what, exactly, I was bolting it against. By the time I begged the magistrates to stop it, 40 people had already danced themselves into the grave. This was Strasbourg in the hot July of 1518, and I was a physician who had seen plague and fever and the bloody flux, but never anything like what walked into our streets that summer. It began with one woman. Her name was Frau Trophea, and she stepped out of her doorway into the narrow lane and began to dance. There was no music, no festival, no wedding. She simply danced, her arms flung out, her feet stamping the cobbles, and she did not stop. Her husband shouted at her. She danced, night fell, and she danced. When she finally collapsed from exhaustion, she slept a few hours, and then she rose and danced again. Within a week, more than 30 others had joined her. Within a month, there were hundreds. I walked among them, and I tell you, it was a thing to freeze the blood. They did not look joyful. Their faces were twisted in something closer to agony. They wept as they moved. They cried out for help even as their limbs kept jerking and spinning against their will, their shoes filled with blood, their feet split open on the stones, and still they danced. The city council summoned us physicians, and here is where I made the mistake I have carried ever since. We reasoned that this was a fever of the blood, an overheating of the humors, and that the only cure was to let the dancers dance the sickness out of themselves. So the council did a thing that seems to me now like madness answering madness. They cleared 2 guild halls. They built a wooden stage in the horse market. They hired pipers and drummers and paid strong men to dance alongside the afflicted, to keep them moving until the fever broke. Instead, the music drew more sufferers in. The drumbeat seemed to reach into passers-by and pull them out of themselves and into the throng. The stages became scenes from a nightmare, bodies collapsing, some dying where they fell of stroke or heart failure or sheer exhaustion, while the pipers, horrified, played on because the council would not let them stop. I have spent long years since asking what took hold of my city. Some said it was a curse from Saint Vitus, whose feast falls in that season, and the pious made pilgrimage to his shrine in the hills. Some whispered of poisoned grain, a mold on the rye of a wet harvest that could set the mind afire with visions and set the body twitching. Perhaps there is truth in that. But I stood among those people and I looked into their eyes, and I do not think it was only poison. That summer had been cruel beyond telling. The harvest had failed. Bread cost more than a poor man could earn in a day. Fever and the pox stalked the poor quarters, and the dead were carried out faster than the graves could be dug. These were people who had reached the very end of what a soul can bear. And I came to believe that when a whole people is pressed past breaking, the breaking can spread like fire in dry grass, one mind lighting the next, until an entire city loses its footing at once. They were not possessed by a saint or a devil. They were possessed by their own despair, and it moved through them like a contagion no medicine of mine could touch. The dancing ended as strangely as it began. The council at last saw that the stages were killing people, tore them down, and forbade all music and dancing in the city. The afflicted were carried to the shrine of Saint Vitus, given red shoes and small crosses, and led in prayer. And slowly, over weeks, the fever loosed its grip. I never learned how many died. The records blur, and I think we did not wish to count. But I know this. I saw human beings dance until their hearts gave out, and no one, not the priests, not the council, not I in all my learning, could tell them how to stop. He walked into our village speaking no language any of us had ever heard, and he pointed at the sun as though he had come from it. This was a hamlet in Germany in the year 1544 by the count of our priest, and I was the miller's daughter, 15 years old, the first to lay eyes on the stranger who came down out of the hills that autumn morning. He was a young man, perhaps 20, dressed in clothes of a green cloth none of us could name. Not wool, not linen, cut in a fashion no traveller had ever brought through. His skin was fair, his hands were soft, the hands of a man who had never worked a field. And when he spoke, the sounds fell strange and quick and musical, and not one of us, not the priest who knew Latin, nor the merchant who knew French, could make out a single word. The priest thought him mad or foreign, and took him in out of Christian charity. For weeks the young man ate at our tables and slept by our fires, and slowly, he began to learn our tongue. And as he learned it, the things he told us made the priest's face go white. He said he was a boy from a city far to the north, a city called Bergen by the sea. He had been a mere child, tending sheep on a hillside, when a great mist had rolled over him. He had heard a sound, he said, like a mighty bell struck once, and a warmth had passed through his whole body. And when the mist lifted, he was standing not on his own hillside, but on the wooded ridge above our village, in a country he did not know, among a people he had never seen. The priest pressed him hard, for such a tale smelled of witchcraft. What year did the boy believe it to be? And the young man answered without hesitation. He named a year that had not yet come to pass, a year some centuries beyond our own. He spoke of his city having wonders we could not picture. Wagons that ran without horses, lamps that burned without flame or oil, filling whole streets with a light like day, great ships of iron that did not sink, voices that could travel across the sea in an instant, faster than any rider. My father laughed at first, but the young man did not speak like a madman spinning tales for bread. He wept. He begged us to help him find the way back. He spoke of a mother and a sister he had left standing in a kitchen, and he swore they would grow frantic when he did not come home for supper. A supper that, by his reckoning, would not be cooked for hundreds of years. The priest wrote it all down in his own hand, every word, and sent word to the bishop. And I will tell you what troubled me most, what has stayed with me all these years since. This young man could not read our letters. He knew nothing of our kings or our wars or our saints. Yet he could count and reckon numbers faster than any merchant in the county, and he drew upon a slate machines and diagrams that no artisan among us could understand. Clean, exact drawings, made by a hand that had learned them somewhere. He stayed among us through the winter, growing thinner and quieter, always watching the ridge where he had appeared. And on the first morning of spring, he was gone. His bed was cold, his green clothes, which he had folded and kept though we offered him honest wool, were gone with him. There were no tracks in the frost. No one saw him leave. The priest searched the ridge and found only a wide ring in the melting snow, the grass beneath it flattened and faintly scorched, and no footprint leading in or away. I am an old woman now, and the bishop's men took the priest's writings long ago, and no one speaks of the stranger anymore. But some nights I still walk to the foot of that ridge, and I look up at it, and I wonder whether he ever reached his mother's kitchen, and whether his supper was still warm. If you made it this far, let me know down in the comments which of the three stayed with you the longest. And I'll see you again next time.